The best games are the ones that have a story to tell beyond what their cover art and brief description of the plot and gameplay convey. With many of these games, you know exactly what you're getting into as the tone is set with ominous music, a dark color palette, demonic creatures. There's no doubt about what this game is trying to show you. But what about the games that are showing you all the complete opposite? A world that looks welcoming, comfortable, bright and cheerful colors, eccentric NPCs, beautiful peaceful music, and just an overall magical and enchanting vibe. I've always felt that the dark side hidden in the beautiful and tranquil fantasy worlds was actually most effective in disturbing you as the player and leaving you with a lasting impression. Unforgettable even. In this video, I'm going to give you some examples from my favorite games where I found this to be the most chilling and memorable as we discuss the dark and disturbing side behind brightly colored games. Before we get started, hi, my name is Angelika, and maybe I'm talking about the darkness in games because I've read so many Elder Scrolls that my world has just gotten overall darker. Does anyone have any suggestions for that, by the way? But really, I'm making this video to see if there's anybody out there that kind of thinks similarly to me. I do really enjoy the horror genre and games that are intentionally dark like that, where you know you're getting into it, but at the same time, I really appreciate games that aren't trying to do that, games that kind of look sort of innocent even on the surface, but they have this dark side to them. I always think that this is just the most effective way to go about that. Something that you don't expect and then it's just there. And to begin, I thought we'd discuss our favorite game, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. Honestly, Oblivion has horror game level content. Now, you may argue that the story as is and the backdrop is already pretty unsettling, and you're right. There are Oblivion gates opening all over Cyrodiil, the Emperor is killed, and nobody really knows who's responsible yet. The threat is very immediate and, yes, demonic. But the way in which it's presented on the surface was never really that frightening to me. My first impressions really were like this beautiful and lush green forest, a crystal lake, a blue sky. After that sewer, like you're chilling. The sense of impending doom first starts to seep in as you approach the Oblivion Gate outside Kvatch, and the most striking thing here is the change from the clear blue skies to this apocalyptic red sky that feels like it's going to fall down on top of you. You don't really expect it. Like, I remember my first time making my way up that hill to Kvatch, seeing the sky change honestly just like sent a chill down my spine. And then like the actual plains of Oblivion themselves, like once you've entered the gates, didn't really ever bother me too much. Like, it's kind of bright in there, and once you're used to it, it's all right. It's pretty in keeping with Oblivion's overall vibe. There's a couple of things in there that are pretty dark as they are, but because you're expecting them, the effect isn't the same. And also the fact that you have to do so many of them that they eventually turn into a chore. I mean, that's something that kind of takes the fear factor out of it for me. Going back into the peaceful forests of Cyrodiil, the game does a great job to lower your guard, and you're surrounded by this nature, verdant landscapes, a big city on the horizon. In addition to all that, the masterpiece that is the Oblivion soundtrack by Jeremy Soule plays in the background the whole time. Honestly, Oblivion is a cozy game, if you look at it like that. As you're making your way through the world, it can happen that a civilian dies by your hand. Whether that is intentionally or unintentionally is none of my business. But the first time it happens, you'll see a message on screen. Your killing has been observed by forces unknown. This is equal parts intriguing and unsettling. You're now aware that consequences are imminent, but it's not the city guard. So who could it be? And when is it coming? This is where, again, in my opinion, the game really succeeds to send a chill down your spine, as it waits for you to be completely relaxed and sleeping before the speaker of the Black Hand, Lucien Lachance, comes to you as you're barely awake and addresses you by what you are. A murderer. When you don't know who he is or what he wants, like, this first encounter is particularly disturbing. Let's just quickly compare this to how you initiate the Dark Brotherhood questline in Skyrim. So Skyrim is not a brightly colored game. It has a pretty dull color palette, and I mean, as the player, you're almost expecting a level of darkness to be there. And yes, there is the morbid detail that it was a child who performed the Black Sacrament, and that is your gateway into the Dark Brotherhood questline, but the person that you're meant to kill inspires no sympathy. Grelad the Kind is a horrible person, and many players have killed her with no intention of joining the Dark Brotherhood, or some even maybe without knowledge that this is what it leads to. Honestly, at this point, it's a sin to just let her be. Like, she is a menace. In Oblivion, however, it's the fact that you could kill anybody to start this questline. I mean, it could be somebody totally friendly and innocent, someone that hasn't done anything wrong, and that could be your way to initiate the Dark Brotherhood questline. You have to live with yourself knowing that you're responsible. I would argue that that is a lot darker than what happens in Skyrim. That said, I think the Dark Brotherhood questline in Skyrim is excellent, possibly my favorite faction quest in the game, but in my opinion, the contrast that you see in Oblivion is just that much more effective, that much more disturbing for me. Even the sanctuary in Oblivion is based in one of the brightest cities in the game, in Cheydinhal. I want to add here another thing that personally really caught me off guard, and those were the consequences of your sinful actions when it came to the Knights of the Nine questline, and how you're not able to wear the armor after committing certain acts until you've repented. So this kind of adds a sense of responsibility and makes you more conscious of your character's moral compass, or lack thereof. Briefly going back to the Dark Brotherhood questline, I'm not going to detail all of it in this video. There are some really great videos out there that go into all of the gory details, but as a final point, I wanted to mention that the ending of that questline, it has this unbearable sense of injustice when Lucien Lechance is wrongfully accused and forced to pay for the sins of the real traitor. I will perhaps never get over that, considering especially like how he was killed and left there. Rest in peace, Lucien Lechance. You would have really liked true crime documentaries. The Dark Brotherhood is just a fraction of the true darkness of Oblivion. Some other notable examples for me include vampirism. Vampires were so much scarier in Oblivion. Now, I know in Skyrim you had like the vampire lord form, but it's so exaggerated that it kind of loses a part of what made vampires scary for me in the Elder Scrolls. Like, they're alright. But Oblivion really paid attention to all stages of vampirism, starting from when you first contracted the disease and then you begin to have the nightmares that the game like so vividly describes to you. I just want to read a couple of examples here. You dream of someone sleeping peacefully in his bed, when a shadowy, gaunt figure silently enters the room. Approaching the bed, the figure leans down and sinks its fangs into the sleeping person. After a few moments, the pale figure rises, blood dripping down his or her chin. A color flows back into the vampire's face, and his or her features fill out. You recognize the face as your own. You awake screaming. In your dream, you open your eyes to a beautiful sky. The sun is bright, but you feel cool, even a bit damp. You draw a breath but begin to cough as you expel blood and dirt that you've inhaled into your lungs. As you try to draw another, you see a shovel of dirt being emptied onto your face. The sunlight grows fainter as you view it through the soil that covers your body. You would scream, but your mouth fills with dirt before you can make a sound. This alone is so well written and creepy, and I mean, it's especially effective when you're waking up in like a well-lit room, nicely decorated, a comfortable bed. As you're getting these nightmares, you're also seeing your character's physical state deteriorate as you succumb to vampirism, coming to a point where you're barely recognizable and you're also now shunned in public places. Another thing which made a big impression on me was this Dunmer alchemist from Skingrad, you know the one, and her super innocent line of questioning around local laws and fines.
By the way, do you happen to know what the fine is here in Cyrodiil for necrophilia?
Yeah, that one really stuck with me. What about the beautiful young Countess Alicia Caro of Leyawiin, whose fine clothing and lavish castle do nothing to mask her rotten personality and unbridled hatred for Khajiit and Argonian immigrants? Upon exploring the castle further, you learn of her cruelty as she has a secret torture chamber accessible from her private quarters. What unspeakable horrors were the poor souls subjected to under the merciless hand of the Countess? We can only speculate. The next games that I want to cover here are The Sims, mainly The Sims 2 and 3. Now, I've never played The Sims 1, I bet I've missed out on a lot, and then when it comes to The Sims 4, I played it, didn't like it, don't know too much about it, so if anyone in the comments has any creepy Sims 4 facts or lore, please do leave them in the comments below. Starting with The Sims 2, you really don't expect what they end up throwing at you in terms of lore. Like, on the surface, it's really not that kind of game, right? Like, it's supposed to be a life simulator where you create your family, you customize everything, you build your house, and the biggest threat is death, which we will get back to in a little bit, but first I want to talk to you about the neighbors. They have a lot of secrets. Now, going back, yes, The Sims has lore, and it's actually very well written. The biggest and most well-known mystery in the lore was the disappearance of Bella Goth, which by the time you get to start playing has already occurred. Totally didn't dress in red because we were gonna cover her in this video. Absolutely not. Starting with her own family, her husband was an older man, and she's this young, very elegant and beautiful woman. It is suggested that she married him for money, but they do have 2 children together. Her last known location was on the deck of a local Casanova Don Lothario's house, and his last memories were those of the rejection of his romantic advances towards her. Bella can be encountered in another world, Strangetown, where she has no memories of her life or relationships. It appears that she was abducted by aliens and then just dropped off in Strangetown, a totally different town to where she came from, and again, it's the same person, but she's got no memories. I feel like in a way, Bella Goth is the Laura Palmer of The Sims, except she's not dead, just really messed up. I don't know, it's just like the whole vibe of like Bella Goth having all these secrets and it not being very clear as to like what her relationships are. I feel like that's very like Laura Palmer-esque, very Twin Peaks. If we dive further into Strangetown, we can really get a sense of the darkness and just how mentally disturbed all of the people that live there are. My favorite resident is Olive Spectre, who lives with her niece Ophelia Nigmos in a house with a rather large graveyard attached. There are many stories behind each of the graves, but I want to focus on those of her deceased husbands. That's right, plural. Olive was married many times, but seems to have very little luck keeping her men alive. The plot thickens when you actually read the names on the gravestones. You've got Hugh Thanasia, Rigor Mortis, Ichabod Spectre. Oh wait, no, that one's not so bad. Earl E. Demise. Overlooking the graveyard is a very comfortable looking armchair where Olive can sit and ponder over her deceased lovers and relatives who surely perished due to natural causes. The gravestone closest to her armchair is that of Ichabod, suggesting that they had like a closer bond. But the cherry on top here is that when you look through her memories, you find that she had a relationship with none other than the Grim Reaper, or with Death, and this even resulted in a son, Nervous subject. Nervous had a troubling childhood, to say the least. He was taken away from Olive by social services and adopted by a pair of scientists who appear to be performing some cruel experiments on him. Of course he's nervous. Speaking of death, in The Sims 2 it was all very brutal, with there being so many different ways to die in the game, lots of which could be totally unexpected, disturbing, and downright heartbreaking, especially if you've spent like a long time building your family and a legacy. Also, the design of the Grim Reaper in this game is my favorite out of all Sims games, with his skeletal features and black robes, just how Olive likes them. The Sims 3 Grim Reaper wasn't as scary by design, but the music that played when he appeared was always so unsettling for me. The Sims 3 was actually a very brightly colored game. The base game world, Sunset Valley, is beautiful with pretty green landscapes and lakes, super cozy looking environment. It has like a much more subtle but still very effective dark side. One of the things that I always found really scary were like these eyes looking out of a shut off mine in the corner of the map. There's nothing much to it, but they're always there, watching. Another creepy detail that came with the base game was the graveyard with the mausoleum, which you could actually go into to explore with your sim. It is a rabbit hole, meaning that you can't see inside of it, but when your sim is exploring, you are given like a series of prompts and options, like what you want to do next, like you want to go down the dark corridor or like swim through the cave, things like that. You will mostly get out of it after getting mauled by a zombie bear, and I mean, though you don't get to see it, it's just the thought. It's kind of both humorous and super creepy. Like, there's zombie bears under that. Some real scary stuff was introduced in the World Adventures expansion, which to this day is one of the best expansions for a Sims game ever. But basically here you could travel to 3 different locations for like a vacation based on either France, China, or Egypt. In each location they introduced the concept of tomb raiding, so your Sims can explore ancient burial sites, tombs, excavations, and they'll find like treasures or do missions assigned in each of the locations, and they'll even come across mummies. The music when you're down there exploring is pretty scary, and the first time that you ever encounter a mummy is going to be very memorable. For me, I found the sarcophagus first by itself, and I spent like a little too long trying to figure something out when suddenly a mummy came out of it. Honestly, it was so terrifying. It did not need to go this hard. It didn't, but it did. Some other notable creepy experiences are when you're getting burgled, specifically the music that comes on, and finally the music that plays when ghosts spawn at night if you've gravestones on your lot. Once again, to drive the point home here, very innocent looking games. Super bright colors, positive environment. Like, it's a life simulator. You're meant to like create families and have babies, and that's all super great. But it's got such darkness in the background, like That always felt so creepy, but I loved it for that. I also want to give the example of World of Warcraft. Now, I can't not do it. It's one of my favorite games. I'm mainly going to talk about WoW Classic here, but when you play it for the first time, it's got this almost cartoony vibe with how colorful everything is. Like, even starting from the character creation menu where all of the races and classes are wearing like brightly colored clothing, even like the darker classes like the Warlock, like he's pretty brightly dressed. Looking back to Warcraft 3, the franchise is no stranger to a dark and disturbing story. Now, admittedly, Warcraft 3 was a lot grittier than World of Warcraft, for me at least, but I feel like also in that game, you're kind of in this space for most of the story. Pretty early on, you get a sense of like foreboding, and you think that you're doing the right thing. The main character's morals are put into question, even though I stand by the culling of Stratholme. I don't know what else you could have done here, like Mal'Ganis would have just taken those people for himself, but anyways, it all leads to this chilling climax, and it's one of my favorite cutscenes out of any game ever. So Warcraft 3, again, the vibe is there. It doesn't like affect you in the same way that it's kind of unexpected. You kind of know what you're getting into from the beginning. It does have that setup. In World of Warcraft, however, everything feels a lot more lighthearted, at least from the beginning. Like, there's even a bit of silliness, particularly around like how the characters look in general, but once you start making your way out of the starter zones and into the wider Azeroth, it slowly introduces you to some of the grim realities of this world. Some races, of course, are introduced to this a lot sooner than others, especially striking if you've played Warcraft 3, you're starting as an undead, and you're now seeing the world that Arthas left behind, how he shaped it, the direct consequences. If you start off as a human, very similar to Cyrodiil, you have Elven Forest, a peaceful and beautiful location, and the most dangerous inhabitants inspire more rage than fear. But as you level and progress into other zones bordering the forest, you make some connections with certain quests like the Legend of Stalvan, which makes you go back to these low-level places again to kill like a higher-level mob, which spawns there for the quest. There's just something kind of grisly about seeing like a ghostly apparition appear in like a cozy and non-threatening location. There's also lots of Easter eggs, but one of my favorites is the Children of the Corn reference with the kids that walk to a house near Gulcher, and then like the audio changes when you enter the house. Super creepy music starts playing, and then a deep voice sounds in the room. You will die.
You will die.
I remember getting up at like 6 a.m. or something silly like that just to go follow them and experience it for myself, because it only happened like once a day. Totally worth it. Then speaking of the zones that border the forest like Duskwood, there is so much lore and history in this zone. Like, this is the place where it's really recommended that you actually read all of the quest text just to get a feel for what's really happening, the general atmosphere, how did this place get this way, why do the people stay in this cursed forest. At any time you could be ambushed and killed by the abomination called Stitches, who will spawn after the gift of the Embalmer, and that's particularly terrifying in hardcore. The best thing about this is, again, the contrast. Like, there was such a satisfying feeling when I needed to go back to Stormwind from there, just the way that the sky clears up, the music changes to the Elven Forest theme. It makes the creepy places seem that much darker. World of Warcraft has lots of creepy and dark details, and for those of you who didn't know, there's even an alternate Chinese WoW client that like censors or changes a lot of this. A bit of background if you didn't know, China has some pretty strict censorship laws, especially when it comes to depictions of death in the media. There's some pretty humorous comparison images out there, but I actually find that some of them ended up looking creepier than the original. Now, to really drive the point home, we should have some honorable mentions. In Animal Crossing, at 3:33 a.m., an alien will appear on your TV if you have one, and it will speak for like a minute, giving some sort of message. Why is it there? It is so scary for no reason. I love it. In Heroes of Might and Magic 5, in maps where there is water, you may come across a siren. The siren, if visited, will kill 30% of your hero's army, but it'll give you experience based on the hit points of the creatures killed, which more often than not, honestly, isn't worth the creature loss. But it's just the fact that it's there. Like, it really caught me off guard the first time I found it, because the world in Heroes of Might and Magic, it's kind of very bright as well, like this kind of high fantasy, brightly colored, everything's kind of cute looking, the music's very peaceful, and then you just see that, and what it does also just makes it so much creepier. In Little Big Planet 1, I want to mention like all of the wedding levels, but specifically the one titled Darkness. There was this one like sitting wooden gnome that you can find, and I can't find the audio, like the sound that it made, but it was like super creepy. In conclusion, I love creepy details in innocent looking games. I think that that is where horror is probably most effective, when you're not expecting it. Like you play something like Outlast and you know exactly what you're gonna play, and like sure, you're tense, and Outlast was a great game, don't get me wrong, I loved it, but it's really the element of surprise when it comes to games like Oblivion. Like Oblivion isn't a horror game, but it might as well be with all the detail that it has. World of Warcraft is particularly memorable for me because I was like a child when I started playing it, and I have been playing it all these years as well, and anytime I find like a creepy detail, it almost feels like going back to my childhood, and like it's still just scary. But yeah, that's pretty much it on my rant about like darkness and disturbing themes in brightly colored and innocent looking games. With that, I really wonder if there's anyone else out there that kind of feels the same, or if I'm just talking to myself. Honestly, I don't think I've brought this topic up with anyone else, so please let me know if this is like nonsense, or if you're kind of digging the vibe, if you're getting it. Also, please excuse my voice, I've been a little bit sick, which is why it's like lower than usual. Couldn't do anything about it, so we're just rolling with it. But yeah, that's all I got. So if you're enjoying the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate all of the support. Let me know in the comments below what are your favorite like horror moments from these innocent looking games. I'd love to hear more examples. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Be seeing you. Bye.